May 29th, 1453, just before dawn. The walls of Constantinople had stood for 1,000 years. They had survived Attila the Hun, survived the Arabs, survived the Crusaders, survived plague, civil war, and siege after siege after siege. No army in history had ever broken them. And now, outside those walls, stood a 21-year-old sultan with the largest army the Eastern Mediterranean had ever seen. His name was Mehmed II, and he had been planning this moment since he was a child. By sunrise, the city would fall, and the ancient world would end. To understand why Constantinople mattered so much, why its fall sent shockwaves across 3 continents, you need to understand what it actually was. Not just a city. Idea. Constantinople was the eastern capital of the Roman Empire. Founded by Emperor Constantine in 330 AD on a peninsula where Europe meets Asia, the perfect strategic position, surrounded by water on 3 sides, protected by the most sophisticated defensive walls ever built in the ancient world. The Theodosian Walls. Built in 413 AD, nearly 6 kilometers long. Outer wall, inner wall, moat. Some sections 12 meters thick. Towers every 70 meters, each one able to rain down fire and arrows on anything approaching. These walls had never been breached from the outside. In 1,000 years, not once, they had become more than stone and mortar. They were the physical embodiment of an idea that Rome still existed, that civilization had a center, that the empire Constantine had built would endure forever. When Mehmed looked at those walls, he didn't see an obstacle. He saw the greatest prize in the world. Mehmed II became Sultan of the Ottoman Empire at the age of 19. His father Mehmed II had died unexpectedly, leaving the throne to a young man that many of his own advisors considered too young, too inexperienced, too impulsive. They were wrong about all 3. From the moment he took power, Mehmed had one obsession: Constantinople. He had studied the city his entire life. Read every account of previous sieges, analyzed every failed attempt to breach the walls, understood exactly why every army that had tried before had failed. The walls were too strong for conventional assault. Previous attackers hadn't had artillery powerful enough to break them. Mehmed would fix that. He hired a Hungarian engineer named Urban, a cannon maker of extraordinary talent who had first offered his services to the Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI. Constantine couldn't afford him. Mehmed could. Urban built Mehmed the largest cannon the world had ever seen. The Basilica Cannon, 8 meters long, capable of firing a stone ball weighing 600 kilograms. It had to be transported to Constantinople on a cart pulled by 60 oxen and 400 men. When it fired, the sound could be heard 20 kilometers away. The walls of Constantinople had never faced anything like it. On April 6, 1453, Mehmed's army arrived outside Constantinople. The numbers tell the story. Byzantine defenders, approximately 7,000 soldiers. Some sources say as few as 5,000. The city's population had collapsed over centuries of decline from nearly 1 million to perhaps 50,000. Ottoman attacking force, between 80,000 and 100,000 soldiers. A fleet of 126 warships. The Basilica Cannon. Dozens of smaller artillery pieces. 7,000 against 100,000. The defenders knew what those numbers meant. They fought anyway. Emperor Constantine XI knew before the siege began that he was almost certainly going to die defending his city. He had spent months before the Ottoman army arrived sending desperate messages to the Christian powers of Western Europe, to the Pope, to Venice, to Genoa, to every king and prince who called himself a Christian ruler. The message was always the same: Constantinople is about to fall. Send help. Send soldiers. Send ships. Western Europe sent almost nothing. Venice sent a small fleet too late. Genoa sent a few hundred soldiers, brave men who fought and died on the walls. The Pope sent prayers. The great powers of Christian Europe watched Constantinople die and did almost nothing to stop it. See, Constantine XI received the news of this abandonment and made a decision. He would fight to the last, not because he thought he could win, but because he was the Roman emperor, and Roman emperors did not surrender their city. The siege lasted 53 days. And those 53 days were among the most extraordinary in military history. Every morning, Mehmed's massive basilica cannon fired at the walls. The sound alone was terrifying, a physical concussive wave that defenders on the walls could feel in their chests. Each shot took 2 hours to reload. But what it did to the walls in those 2 hours of silence was catastrophic. Stone that had stood for 1,000 years began to crack. Sections that had survived a dozen sieges began to crumble. The outer wall in several sections collapsed entirely. Every night, the Byzantine defenders worked frantically to repair the damage, filling the breaches with rubble, wooden beams, earth, anything that could slow the next day's assault. They succeeded. Every night, barely, for 53 days. 7,000 exhausted men repairing walls that 100,000 were trying to destroy. During the day, fighting off Ottoman assault attempts at the breaches. At night, rebuilding what had been destroyed. No sleep, no relief, no reinforcements coming. Just the walls, and the cannon, and the dawn. On the water, Mehmed faced a problem he hadn't fully anticipated. The Byzantines had stretched a massive chain across the Golden Horn, the harbor inlet on the city's northern side. It was thick iron, floating on wooden logs, and it blocked Ottoman ships from entering the harbor and attacking the city's sea walls. Mehmed's fleet tried to break through, failed, tried again, failed again. The chain held. What Mehmed did next is one of the most audacious military engineering feats in history. He ordered his ships moved overland. 70 ships, greased wooden rails, 1,000 men hauling on ropes. In one night, the Ottoman fleet was dragged up and over the hill north of the city and relaunched into the Golden Horn behind the chain. When the Byzantines woke up the next morning and looked out at the harbor they had considered safe, Ottoman warships were already inside. The psychological impact was devastating. For 7 weeks, the pattern continued. Cannon, breach, night repair, dawn assault repulsed. The defenders were extraordinary. Exhausted, outnumbered 14-1, abandoned by the Western powers they had begged for help, they held. The Genoese commander Giovanni Giustiniani Longo became the heart of the defense. He seemed to be everywhere at once, organizing repairs, leading counterattacks, personally fighting at the most threatened breaches. As long as Giustiniani fought, the walls held. On May 22nd, the moon rose in a crescent, the symbol of the Ottoman Empire. Byzantine priests told their people it was an omen. They were right. 1 week later, the final assault began. May 28, 1453, the night before the end. Mehmed gave his army a day of rest, allowed them to pray, walked among his troops, promised them what awaited inside those walls, the wealth of a city that had been the crossroads of civilization for 1,000 years. Inside the city, Constantine XI called a final assembly. He spoke to his soldiers, his officers, the Genoese allies, the Venetian sailors, the priests. The speech has been reconstructed from multiple sources. No one recorded the exact words. But the meaning is clear. He told them they were about to die defending something worth dying for. Then, remarkably, he went to the Hagia Sophia for a final prayer. The great church was full, not just with soldiers, with the city's entire remaining population. 50,000 people who had lived inside these walls their entire lives, knowing that by morning most of them would be slaves or corpses. They prayed. Constantine XI left the church, put on his armor, walked to the walls. He was never seen alive again. The final assault began at 1:30 in the morning on May 29th. Mehmed sent wave after wave. First, his irregular troops, poorly equipped, poorly trained. They were sent to exhaust the defenders and absorb the first fury of Byzantine resistance. They died in enormous numbers. The defenders held. Second wave, Anatolian regular troops. Better trained, better equipped. They hit the breaches hard. The defenders held. Giustiniani was everywhere, fighting, shouting, organizing. The wall was bending but not breaking. And then, Giustiniani was hit. A bolt from a crossbow or early firearm, accounts differ, struck him in the chest. Not a mortal wound, but serious enough. He asked to be carried from the wall. Constantine himself reportedly begged him to stay. He couldn't. The moment Justiniani left the walls, the moment the defenders saw their most visible symbol of resistance being carried away, the defense began to crack. Not because the Ottomans broke through, because the men defending the walls began to look at each other and realize he was gone. In the chaos, a small gate, the Kirkaporta, was found unlocked. Nobody knows who left it unlocked, whether it was carelessness or betrayal, whether it was an accident that changed history or a deliberate act. But a small group of Ottoman soldiers found it and poured through. They climbed the inner wall and raised the Ottoman banner. When Byzantine defenders on the walls saw Ottoman flags flying above them, inside their own city, the defense collapsed. Men who had fought for 53 days. Men who had repaired walls every night and fought every dawn. Men who had held the impossible line for 7 weeks. They saw the flag and understood. It was over. The Ottoman army flooded through every breach simultaneously. Constantine XI, Emperor of Rome, last ruler of the Byzantine Empire, descendant of a line stretching back to Augustus Caesar, threw off his imperial regalia, charged into the Ottoman troops, and disappeared. His body was never officially identified. Some accounts say it was found among the dead, identified by his imperial boots. Others say he was never found at all. He died fighting. That much is certain. How a Roman emperor should die. Mehmed II entered Constantinople on horseback on the afternoon of May 29th. He rode directly to the Hagia Sophia, the greatest church in the Christian world. Built in 537 AD, nearly 1,000 years old. He dismounted at the entrance, bent down and picked up a handful of earth, poured it over his turban in an act of humility before God. Then he walked inside and ordered it converted into a mosque. The crescent replaced the cross above the greatest dome in the ancient world. The city was renamed. Constantinople became Istanbul. What happened in the days after the fall was brutal. Mehmed had promised his troops 3 days of plunder. Standard practice for a city taken by assault rather than surrender. They took it. The population that had prayed in the Hagia Sophia on the last night, 50,000 people, were enslaved or killed. Ancient libraries were looted. Manuscripts that preserved knowledge going back to ancient Greece were burned for warmth or thrown into the sea. Some of the most important texts of the classical world vanished in those 3 days. Mehmed eventually stopped the plunder. He wanted a functioning city, not a ruin. But the damage was done. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves across the world. In Europe, panic. The Ottoman Empire now controlled the land routes to Asia. The spice trade, the Silk Road, everything that had made Mediterranean merchants wealthy for centuries. European powers began desperately searching for alternative routes to Asia. Within 40 years, a Genoese sailor named Christopher Columbus would sail west, trying to reach Asia by going the opposite direction. He found something else entirely. Within 50 years, a Portuguese explorer named Vasco da Gama would sail around Africa to reach India directly. The Age of Exploration, the event that created the modern world, was triggered in large part by the fall of Constantinople. One city's fall changed the shape of everything that came after. The scholars who fled Constantinople as the city fell carried something with them. Books, manuscripts of ancient Greek and Roman texts that had been preserved in Byzantine libraries for centuries. Works of Plato, Aristotle, Thucydides, Sophocles, texts that Western Europe had lost or forgotten during the Middle Ages. They fled to Italy, to Venice, Florence, Rome, and the ideas they brought with them, the rediscovered philosophy and art and science of the ancient world, poured fuel on a cultural movement that had already been beginning. The Renaissance, the intellectual revolution that produced Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael, Copernicus. The scholars of Constantinople, carrying their books out of a burning city, helped light the fire that illuminated the modern mind. Mehmed II was 21 years old when he took Constantinople. He would go on to rule for another 28 years, expand the Ottoman Empire further into Europe, conquer more territory than any sultan before him. He learned Greek, read ancient Greek and Roman texts, commissioned a biography of Alexander the Great, saw himself as the heir not just to the Islamic Caliphate but to the Roman Empire itself. He called himself Kaiser I Rum, Caesar of Rome. The man who destroyed the Roman Empire believed himself its continuation. Constantine XI was 48 years old when he died on those walls. He had been emperor for only 4 years, had spent almost his entire reign preparing for and then fighting the siege he knew was coming. He never married, never produced an heir, spent his final years begging Western Europe for help that never came. He died with no army, no allies, no hope, just his armor, his walls, and his refusal to leave. The Senate of Rome had a tradition in the old days for emperors who died well. They called it consecratio, the elevation of the emperor to divine status after death. Constantine XI never received it. There was no Senate left to give it. But standing on those walls in the darkness before the final assault, knowing what was coming, choosing to stay anyway, he earned it. Here's what the fall of Constantinople actually tells us. An empire that had survived for 1,000 years didn't fall because its walls were too weak. It fell because the people who should have defended it decided it wasn't worth defending. The Western powers who ignored Constantine's pleas. The senators and nobles who had spent the empire's final decades fighting each other for power instead of preparing for the threat outside the walls. The walls held for 53 days against 100,000 soldiers. They fell because of an unlocked gate. And nobody knows, nobody has ever known, whether that gate was left open by accident or on purpose. Here's what I want you to think about. Constantine XI could have negotiated. Mehmed offered terms. Surrender the city. Keep your life. Keep your freedom. Constantine refused. Was he right to refuse? He died. The city fell anyway. 50,000 people were enslaved. Would negotiation have saved them? Or was there something worth dying for in that refusal? Something that outlasted the empire itself? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want to see how a 21-year-old sultan built the empire that took Constantinople, how Mehmed II went from teenage sultan to the conqueror of the ancient world, that story is coming next.